All right, I'm really excited about tonight. I shouldn't say this, I was working on this right until the end, and then our tech blew up. So thanks to Wes for recovering. He likes to be called Mr. Nervous, and no.
An example of why.
Exactly. Yeah, all AV and tech guys should be called Mr. Nervous. Anyway, that's not too bad, is it? It's all right. Anyway, if you'd like to buy us a new projector, we would take it. All right. Thanks for coming out on a freezing Tuesday night to talk about the philosophy of love. Well, this is what we do, right? The University of Philosophical Research, the Philosophical Research Society. We know love, or we know philosophy, I should say. Here's the etymology, by the way. Philo, love, loving, fond of. We'll actually get into this in later talks about the different kinds of love. And the beautiful word Sophia, which means wisdom, knowledge, wise, or learned. Ultimately, it means a system a person forms for the conduct of her life. And that's what we're about here. We want to help you do that. We want to do it in a very postmodern way, too. So we want to do it with irony and playfulness and fun, but the seriousness that comes with play, if you know Jacques Derrida. Also found out that philosophy is a well-being beauty brand where science and inspiration meet. Didn't know that, but I feel like many of you do know that. Okay. It was a pretty amazing site with excellent products, apparently. So I've mentioned a few times, we've had one lecture. I mentioned last time that Robert Solomon's book, Love, Emotion, Myth, and Metaphor, is an important one for the philosophy of love and for understanding love. Love, Emotion, Myth, and Metaphor, a 1981 book. Solomon was a great philosopher because he kind of, like us, he kind of hated philosophy. He hated the discipline of philosophy as we do. Manly Hall despised it. Who was it told me? Somebody, I think it was someone who worked with Manly Hall, said, I've been waiting a while to tell you this, Greg. But one of Manly's last words, concerns were, God, I hope the academics don't take over. Sorry, Manly, but I hate philosophy as much as you do. Because philosophy should be about a way of life. It should be about Sophia. It should be about Philo. It should be about love and wisdom. And that's our talk tonight. How cool is that? The philosophy of love. So he says this. This is Solomon in his book here. By the way, that's an amazing sculpture if you haven't seen it in the Louvre. The Kiss. Psyche revised by Cupid's Kiss. He says this. I just want to ask a simple question in this book. What is it to fall in love? Or why is love so important to us? And this is him. He's kind of a snark. And in return, what we get are murky allegories and mythological heroes of ancient Greece and Rome. Hey, what's wrong with Anyway, biological studies of the mating habits of insects, fish, birds, and monkeys. How-to and how-not-to books about almost everything. Surveys, interviews, and confessions. Bad poetry, and volumes of vacuity, the only point of which seems to impress us with the author's own sensitivity. We get greeting card platitudes and voyeuristic anthropology, such as 1001 Ways the Savages and the French Make Love, and the curious things they believe about it. This was 1981. He would have loved Twitter and BuzzFeed. And of course, psychiatric diagnoses and advice often bemoaning the perennial, quote, tragedy of modern man's inability to love. Everything but an answer. He has an answer. Love is an emotion. Okay, well, duh. So this is why people hate philosophers. Love is an emotion. Sure, it's an emotion. I feel it. But he wants to philosophize the emotions. And he does a good job. In fact, in the discipline of philosophy, it's what he's known for, is being the philosopher who tries to analyze emotion. And there's philosophically analyze emotion. And there are not too many of them because philosophers love, I don't know, truth, being and becoming and all that. Not too much on the emotions. You hearing me okay? Okay, good. Love is an emotion. Well, he's also cranky, so he says it's a confusion of myths. First of all, don't talk about myths that way. He means myth in the popular sense of lie. We mean it here as a story that's so true you can barely see the edges of it and know that it holds you. But okay. Love is a confusion of myths and metaphors. Quote from Solomon, just an ordinary, non-cosmic, so he wants to kind of bring love down from its lofty heights and ontological existence. It's just an ordinary, non-cosmic, luxurious, but non-essential emotion. You don't have to have this emotion. It is not divine, much less eternal. It is not part of human nature or the key to the gates of happenings or any kind of answer to questions mostly unasked or unknown. It is an emotion long surrounded by myths and metaphors, motivated by false hopes and the desire for a guarantee that somehow a miserable life can be turned into happiness at a single stroke, that once love is found, it will last, even forever. He puts that in quotation marks. That one will be loved, no matter what. Again, in quotation marks. You feel like he's like Kierkegaard. He's writing out of pain of being rejected or hurt. These are illusion, he says. And much of what has been said about love is nothing but illusion. Do you hear me? Do you hear my pain? But does it not follow that love itself is an illusion? It does not follow that love itself is an illusion, as many Marxists, feminists, and Freudians have insisted. Love is an emotion. It's just an emotion. It's like in The Godfather. Don't make a big deal out of it. Never mind. I'm going to kill you. It's just business. Don't make it. Never mind. For Solomon, emotions are intelligent constructions. And this is where he, I think, is especially valuable and interesting. They are socially constructed. Emotions don't happen to you. You choose them from an array that is made available to you by society and your culture. Emotions are not just choices like from a cafeteria. Oh, I think I'll feel this today. They are judgments of the world. I think I'm going to get pissed off at this guy who just cut me off, or this woman who hurt me or ignored me, or this man who is insensitive to me. Emotions are judgments of the world. You don't have to fall in love. You choose to fall in love. You're not passive in this phenomenon. What kind of society, he asks, makes romantic love possible? And he says this, because romantic love, as you may know, hasn't always existed. It's a fairly recent phenomenon. And in fact, it's coincidental with the birth of the individual in Western culture, which is about the 17th century. There were no individuals before the 17th century. You were a part of a family, a clan, a tribe, a group, whatever. At least that's where you got your identity. So with the birth of the individual comes Solomon says, and I think he's right, and then you throw in the Enlightenment science that has overturned the old paradigm of the church, and then you throw in the Romantics. The Romantics are to blame for most of the world's problems, like love. But that was their reaction to the Enlightenment, is to promulgate a very strong sense of individuality and nature, separate from the machine, right? Like the literal machines, or the machine of the production of knowledge in the Enlightenment. There has to be, Solomon says, a distinction between public positions and personal roles, so that you can work at one thing and be something else. Again, the Enlightenment. He has a whole bunch of things: individual idealization, fantasy and fiction, mobility and flexibility in relationships, right? Because for most humans on the planet, love has just been, where you grew up and who was available or who you were set up with. But now with the Enlightenment and with the Romantic reaction against it and the birth of the individual, we get mobility and flexibility in relationships, and we get personal choice. Personal choice to the point where our independence and mobility are more important than other bonds. What will make us move here in America in 2019? What will make us pick up from one place to another and move?
Opportunity.
Yeah, money, or the potential for money. And Los Angeles is especially known for that, or at least a certain kind of path to fame, maybe, and the money that comes with it. By the way, Los Angeles Stories this fall, another of our series about the mythological dimensions of Los Angeles. We will trade, Robert Solomon says, we will trade massive loneliness for the chance to make these decisions, for the chance at love in this radically individualized society. And sex is the primary ritual to enact this connection, as it should be. And he says romantic love is not for everyone, and there may be good reasons for rejecting it. Any of you rejected it? Yeah, me too. So, love is about intimacy, he says. In a society where the individual is rugged and radical and the measure of everything, if you can find another individual, well, that makes it all the more magic, right? You can share that identity. And that's an incredible thing in a society that's based on individualism and the self, to share that self, where the self is the fundamental unit of humanity, right? The self, and you're going to share that. You're going to open those borders, especially after you've worked hard to win that self against the forces arrayed against it. And so he says that love is a redefinition of self that no amount of sex or fun or time together will add up to. And that sounds right, doesn't it? I remember a period where that's exactly how I think it was the 90s, that's exactly how you measure love, is sex, fun, and time together. Okay, well, I'm feeling a little short on one of these, so I don't think we're in love anymore. It's nice to be able to measure love. It's always wrong. Tension. Solomon's pointing out that the tension that comes from these two selves, these two independent autonomous selves merging, overlapping to a degree, that's good. The great psychiatrist Scott Peck used to say that love is about the friction. And indeed, it is. Can you imagine a love relationship without friction? What would it be? Like, every day, not a weekend, every day. What would it be? Robert Solomon in 1981 says this transcends gender. which was a pretty amazing thing to say in 1981. I also like that he says love is not a commitment. It is the opposite of a commitment. Because a commitment says you're going to, remember it's an emotion for Solomon. A commitment says you're going to feel this way 10 years from now. How can you possibly make that commitment? You can't. It's the opposite of a commitment. And he says, and I think he's right about this, love is a decision to say a word. You know what he's talking about, right? Like, it's almost like a speech act, you know, where if you say, I love you, you're in love. Like it just happens because you said the word, you know. I don't need to explain this. You know exactly what I'm talking. And then this is, I think, a really interesting contribution of his to the discussion, the philosophy of love, is that when this happens, when these autonomous individuals find each other, they agree to share this emotion and this love world, that this world has its own reality. It has a particular scope, which is pretty small. It's usually just you and the other person. It has a particular focus. And in fact, this is the attraction of love as a world, is that you get to block out everything else, right? So you want a very small scope and a very narrow focus in your love world. Inside this world, it's filled with poetry. As he said, often bad poetry. And you know what I'm talking about. It's because inside this world, we have the language of love, and we have a whole talk and discussion on that, how it fails. Nothing quite fails like the language of love. And so you end up with cliches, or you end up sounding like an idiot, as I often do. But you have this great ritual called sex, which is the oldest ritual of humanity on the planet. And there's no better ritual for depicting union, because it is quite literally union. So he says it's a dialectic of the self and the other, the love world. And it certainly is that, isn't it? Now, Solomon, you don't know this, but Solomon has an argument. He has an argument that he's trying to deconstruct. And he mentions it in passing, but it's throughout the whole book, and you can tell very clearly what it is. It's Plato's Symposium, and he hates it. He hates it because he thinks that the Symposium is about Platonic love. You know what Platonic love, this is where it comes from, Plato's notion of love, which is essentially that when you love, you've misplaced your emotion. What you're really loving is not her or him. What you're really loving is the form of beauty, which isn't here at all. It's just a faint memory in your eternal soul. Well, that's hot, isn't it? That's awesome. So Solomon has good reason to hate that, where love just gets sublimated and subsumed into philosophy. But he doesn't understand the Symposium. I want to help you see the Symposium, not in light of Solomon's cynicism, but in light of what is Plato's greatest text. And it's amazing. So, about 360 BCE, it's hard to date these things, but you get the idea. This is not a typical Platonic dialogue. Now, I love reading Plato, but if you've ever read Plato, it's like you can see the setup coming from a mile away. So there's some poor guy, and he's coming back from the market, and and Socrates says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I just bought some pomegranates." He's like, "What is a pomegranate, really?" Okay. And then you get into the dialogue, which Socrates always wins, because Plato sets him up that way. So Socrates, we don't have any of his writings. We have Plato writing about Socrates. Okay, this is very much like Jesus and the New Testament. We don't have Jesus' writings. We have the gospel writers and his early followers who write about Jesus and quote him and such. So Plato typically sets up Socrates in this fashion as the hero of his own dialogue in every one of the dialogues, except this one. It's amazing. It would be wonder if you were interested in Plato, if you read all the other dialogues and then you came to the symposium, you would say, who wrote this? Because I know Plato didn't write this. But apparently he did, but it's hard to say. It may have been used, one critic says it may have been used as an advertisement for his academy, right? So he handed out this little dialogue, the symposium, and said, hey, if you want to come to my academy, this is what it'll be like. Okay, a symposium in Greek, that's the syn prefix, S-Y-N, and posia means to drink. So this is the most brilliant advertisement for a school I've ever heard of. Come drink together, right? Plato's Academy, symposium. Let's drink together. And let's have some young boys there for sexual pleasure. Let's have a flute player. Let's have some food. And let's push through the whole night. So, I don't even want to tell you the setting because it's a Russian doll. And it's a frame story within a frame story within a frame story, which is so unlike Plato. Right? He's just like, all right, Socrates says this, right? So he deliberately sets this up as a guy who heard about this party, who told another guy, and then this guy he's like, what about that party? Did you hear about that? Well, I heard Glaucon say something about, what did you hear? This is what I heard, but I don't know. What? This is Plato, the greatest philosopher in the history of the world, and he's already set us up with unreliable narrators right at the beginning. It's so unlike him, which makes it much more interesting. So and it's way past the event. So this is written a decade or more after the thing happened. Again, very much unlike Plato, who's about truth and logic and reason and dialectic and and you're telling the story at fourth or fifth hand, and it's over a decade old. What's going on here? So, here's just a little bit of the setting. Aristodemus met Socrates, fresh from the baths. I love this. On his way to the symposium honoring Agathon. Agathon was a great tragedian. The Greeks had contests for their plays, and Agathon had just won for his tragedy the day before. Aristodemus is invited to crash the party with Socrates, but Socrates stops along the way to think. And he ends up on the neighbor's porch, and he's still sitting there on the neighbor's porch, and they have to go get him. It's awesome. So this topic for the evening is love. So in Greek, that would be eros. That would be a god, right? The god Eros. But of course, the Greek gods represent principles and emotions and realities. So we have Phaedrus there, and you'll meet him next. Pausanias, Eryximachus, a physician, Aristophanes, and Socrates. Let's see what they have to say. So Phaedrus is kind of the convener. He's the one who sends the flute girl out, meaning, okay, it's 4 a.m. And now things are serious. By the way, have you heard that podcast about 4 a.m.? Somebody did some research on the things that happen at 4 a.m. You should check. It's amazing. It's one of the most interesting things. It's that Leonard Cohen song, It's 4 in the morning. Just think about it. It'll start coming to you, all these 4 a.m. things. So I'm going to say it was 4 a.m. They threw out the fluke girl and all the boys. Phaedrus is a handsome young man and an admirer of Socrates. And he's the one who says, okay, listen, here's what we're going to do. We've got to focus. Come on, focus. After you've been pushing through all night with the wine. He says, listen, we're going to give speeches on love. Awesome. And they would go counterclockwise. Each person had his place. And there was actually a room in most Athenians' homes for this. You would go to the symposium room. And there would be these couches and two people on a couch. And they would lie down and they would eat grapes and olives and drink and, play around with the young boys and such, and then give speeches. So here we go. Now we're at the speeches. He says, Eros is the oldest of the gods, and therefore he should be honored. The oldest god should be the most honored. He is the source of many blessings and the patron of all love. He says the love of young boys stimulates noble deeds. I know. I wish those defenders of Western culture would read the symposium. Western culture does not begin the way you think it does. Love of man for young boys stimulates noble and courageous deeds. An army composed of older men and their young male lovers would be invincible, says Phaedrus. Lovers, they would give up their lives for each other. And he gives a lot of examples of that happening. Eros is the chief cause of virtue and happiness. Eros is the chief cause of virtue and happiness, and it creates military prowess and courage. Awesome. Pausanias is the designated driver. He's trying to keep everyone from going over the edge, and he almost succeeds. He says there are two kinds of love, the heavenly and the beautiful, and the ugly and the base. Okay, as you can probably tell, these guys are not great at this, right? And that's because we're setting up Socrates to be the winner again, right? Okay, two kinds of eros, because again, we're praising the god, but the god is also the thing. Heavenly and beautiful, vulgar and base. The better love is homosexual love. The worst is mere lust. And this is not unusual or odd for Greek culture. Homosexual love, the love of an older man for a younger boy, is a virtue in ancient Greek culture in which the older man plays the role of mentor in not just physicality, but also philosophy. The common people, Pausanias says, have degraded homosexual love by making it mere physical attraction. Those commoners. They're always messing up love. Real love is the love of the beautiful soul, good character and intelligence. It must be practiced with grace, for it aims at virtue and wisdom. Thus, eros, the highest of which is male-to-male love, is the best thing for the individual and the state. You want a nicely functioning city-state, you need to value and protect male love, male-to-male love. Keep in mind, these are the conservative positions in ancient Greece, right? Eryximachus, the doctor, he's also a jerk. And I think maybe Plato is kind of pointing this out because someone gets the hiccups, as one does in a night of drinking. Let me just read it to you. This is hilarious. And I think, here's Eryximachus. He's ready to give his speech, and somebody starts hiccuping. Pausanias came to a pause. This is the balanced way in which I have been taught by the wise to speak, etc. And Aristophanes said that the turn of Aristophanes was next, but either he had eaten too much or from some other cause he had the hiccups and was obliged to change turns with Eryximachus, the physician, who was reclining on the couch below him. Eryximachus, he said, you ought either to stop my hiccup or to speak in my turn until I have stopped. So here's the medical doctor. He's about to give a big speech, and they want him to cure the hiccups first. I will do both, said Eryximachus. I will speak in your turn, and you speak in mine, and while I am speaking, let me recommend that you hold your breath. And if after you have done so for some time and the hiccup is no better, then gargle with a little water. And if it still continues, tickle your nose with something and sneeze. And if you sneeze once or twice, even the most violent hiccup is sure to go. I will do as you prescribe, said Aristophanes. Now get on. And so, again, wonderful depictions of love that do really nothing. They advance the argument not at all. They are simply reflections of what everybody else says about love who is saying something about love. Those commoners, they don't say anything about love. They just do love. They make love. Eros is harmony. So this is a physician. He wants to balance the four elements and all the humors. He's interested in that, and he thinks that Eros, the god, and the phenomenon is what does that. It brings harmony, and it's like music. You have all different kinds of love, and Eros is the vehicle of temperance and concord and the source of supreme happiness. Well, great. That's awesome. Thank you. Love is good. Got it. Thank you. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Aristophanes, you may know, a comic playwright, not a tragic playwright, but a comic playwright. And so he has this amazing story, and it's pretty awesome. And this is his explanation for love. It's his philosophy of love. All right. You may know him from Lysistrata or The Clouds, etc. So, let me just let you hear his story. The original human nature was not like the present, but different. The sexes were not two, as they are now, but originally three in number. There was man, woman, and the union of the two, having a name corresponding to this double nature, which had once a real existence, but is now lost. And the word androgynous is only preserved now as a term of reproach, even in ancient Greece. It's not really androgynous, but it's the double sex. You'll see what he means. In the second place, primeval man was round. All right? His back and sides forming a circle. All right? And he had 4 hands and 4 feet. One head, 2 faces, looking opposite ways. Set on a round neck and precisely alike. Also 4 ears, 2 genitals, and the remainder to correspond. He could walk upright, as men now do, backwards or forwards as he pleased. And he could also roll over and over at a great pace, which would have been wonderful to see, right? Turning on his 4 hands and feet, 8 in all, like tumblers going over and over with their legs in the air. This was when he wanted to run fast, of course. Now the sexes were 3, and such as I have described them, because sun, moon, and earth are 3. And originally, man was a child of the sun, woman of the earth, and man-woman, androgyne, of the moon, which is made up of sun and earth. And they were all round and moved round and round like their parents. Terrible was their might and strength. And if you know creation mythology, you know what's coming. The gods make humans, they make them too well, they have to take humans back down, right? They made an attack upon the gods, which must have been amazing. All these arms and feet and hand coming at the gods. And they dared to scale heaven and would have laid hands, many hands apparently, upon the gods. Doubt reigned in the celestial councils. Should they kill them and annihilate this race with thunderbolts, as they had done the giants? Then there would be an end to the sacrifices and worship that we're getting, and they got all those hands, so that works really well. But on the other hand, the gods could not suffer this insolence. At last, after a good deal of reflection, Zeus discovered a way. First of all, Zeus does not reflect. This is from some other tradition. Zeus just acts. He said, I think I have a plan which will humble their pride and improve their manners. Men shall continue to exist, but I will cut them in two, and they will be diminished in strength and increased in numbers. This will have the advantage of making them more profitable to us, which is the whole reason we exist. They shall walk upright on two legs, and if they continue to be insolent and will not be quiet, I will split them again, and they shall hop about on a single leg. He spoke and cut men in two, like a sorb apple, which is halved for pickling, or as you might divide an egg with a hair. Ancient Greece culinary stuff, I guess. And as he cut them one after another, he bade Apollo give the face and the half of the neck a turn, in order that the man might contemplate the section of himself. He would thus learn a lesson of humility. Apollo was also bidden to heal their wounds and compose their forms. So he gave a turn to the face and pulled the skin from all sides over that, in which our language is called the belly, like the purses which draw in. And he made one mouth at the center, which he fastened in a knot, the same which is called the navel. He also molded the breast and took out most of the wrinkles, much as a shoemaker might smooth leather upon a last. He left a few, however, in the region of the belly and the navel, as a memorial of our primeval state. After the division of the two parts of man, each desiring his other half, came together and throwing their arms about one another, entwined in mutual embraces, longing to grow into one, they were on the point of dying from hunger and self-neglect because they did not like to do anything apart. And when one of the halves died and the other survived, the survivors sought another mate, man or woman, as we call them, being the sections of entire men or women, and they clung to that. They were being destroyed when Zeus, in pity? Who is this Zeus? Invented a new plan. He turned the parts of generation round to the front. For this had not always been their position, and they sowed the seed no longer like grasshoppers in the ground, but in one another. And after the transposition, the male generated in the female, in order that by the mutual embraces of man and woman they might breed and the race might continue. Or if man came to man, they might be satisfied and rest and go their ways to the business of life. So ancient is the desire of one another which is implanted with us, reuniting our original nature, making one of the two, and healing the state of man. This is awesome, right? And so to love is to literally find your other half. And that's what you've been longing for. And Aristophanes is, this is not naive myth-making. He's like, look, people will die or they'll move on. You find another other half. That's cool. Just keep going, Keep seeking for this union. Now, we see this all over, right? We see it in the Upanishads with the great creation story of Brahma, who is alone and just wants company. We see it in the Genesis story as well. But let me keep moving here. Agathon, the great tragedian, the one who is being honored at the feast, says Eros is the youngest. Remember, Phaedrus said Eros was the oldest of the gods, so he's using a certain tradition. Agathon now says Eros is the youngest of the gods, and he brought peace to Olympus, and love lives in our minds and hearts. Well, isn't that great? And it creates all these virtues, temperance, courage, wisdom, and all these blessings. All right, again, not really advancing the argument. You're just praising love, okay? You're just doing it in different ways and creating different histories or reciting different histories. Now, here comes the climax, right? Socrates, who's going to sort all this out, right? And say, well, Agathon, clearly you haven't understood this. Except he never says it that clearly. He asks Agathon, what did you mean when you said, and then it goes on and on and on and on, pages. So here's Socrates, here's our hero. Here he comes. And he says, like a good philosopher, he says, well, I don't think you've defined your terms very well. I say that all the time to my philosophy students. Well, what are your terms? I don't understand what you mean by love or goodness or truth. What do you mean? Please define your terms. It's a good thing to do. And he says, and this is where it is amazing. He says, this is his moment. And now, taking my leave of you, I would rehearse a tale of love which I heard from Diotima of Mantinea, a woman wise in this and many other kinds of knowledge, who in the days of old, when the Athenians offered sacrifice before the coming of the plague, delayed the disease 10 years. She was my instructress in the art of love. And I shall repeat to you what she said to me. What? Diotima of Mantinea. I'm going to come back to her. First of all, I want to tell you that the last speaker is actually Alcibiades, who comes in drunk. He is a politician. He may, in fact, have been responsible for Socrates' indictment for corrupting the youth. It may have been because of Socrates' friendship with him, because he's a mess. A great knocking occurs, a great state of intoxication, Alcibiades. And he complains, will you laugh at me because I'm drunk? And of course, we could spend all night on Alcibiades, because he is who? He is Dionysus. Come to the symposium. Wrecks it. Just wrecks it. You know this person? Right? Have you been that person? It's sometimes fun to be that person. The Merry Drunk. Worth reading just for Alcibiades. All right. Diotima, the woman and teacher of Socrates, whom Socrates defers to. Now, she's not there. She wouldn't be allowed there. But she is there through Socrates. Luce Irigaray, the great feminist theorist, says this. In the Symposium, the dialogue on love, when Socrates finishes speaking, he gives the floor to a woman, Diotima. She does not participate in the exchanges or in the meal among the men. She is not there. And yet she is. She herself does not speak. And yet Socrates reports or recounts her views. He borrows her wisdom and power, declares her his initiator, his pedagogue, his teacher on matters of love. But she is not invited to teach there or to eat. Maybe she was invited and did not accept her invitation, but Socrates never says anything about that. And Diotima is not the only example of a woman Eryximachus says, whose wisdom, above all in love, is reported in her absence by a man. She is the interpreter. He interprets, Eryximachus says, the god Eros, between the gods and men, conveying and taking across the gods the prayers and sacrifices of men, and to men the commands and replies of the gods. Okay? And this is correct, because listen to Diotima through Socrates. So he says to this assembled, drunken symposium, in giving speeches on love, he says, let me tell you what a woman told me. And he recounts their dialogue, in which Socrates plays the foil that Socrates disarms in every other dialogue. He sounds like the idiots he encounters. He says to Diotima, when a man loves the beautiful, what does he desire? She says that to him. I answered her, that the beautiful may be his. Still, she said, the answer suggests a further question. What is given by the possession of beauty? To what you have asked, Socrates replies, I have no answer. What? Socrates has no answer? Then she said, let me put the word good in the place of the beautiful and repeat the question once more. If he who loves good, what is it then that he loves? The possession of the good, I said. And what does he gain who possesses the good? Happiness, I said. There is much less difficulty in answering that question. Yes, she said, the happy are made happy by the acquisition of good things, nor is there any need to ask why a man desires happiness. The answer is already final. You are right, Diotima. And is this wish and the desire common to all, and do all men always desire their own good, or only some men? What say you? This is exactly how Socrates talks to other men. All men, I replied, the desire is common to all. Why then, she rejoined, are not all men, Socrates, said to love, but only some of them? Whereas you say that all men are always loving the same things. I myself wonder, Socrates said. There's nothing to wonder at, Socrates, she replied. The reason is that one part of love is separated off and receives the name of the whole, and the other parts have other names. Give me an illustration, he says, which is what all his interlocutors ask him to do. So she says, in Greek, the word poetes, poet, simply means maker. So she says, who are the poets and what do they make? And he's like, well, the poets are those who work in rhythm and verse and they sing the epic songs and all that. And she's like, right, but poet means simply maker. So aren't all people who make poets? And he's like, well, we don't say that. And she says, who's we? It's awesome. And he says, well, okay, well, you're right, actually. The process, the making, is the same no matter what you're making. Poetry as we recognize it, or chairs, or perhaps even love. She says this, and the same holds of love. For you may say generally that all desire of good and happiness is only the great and subtle power of love. But they who are drawn towards him by any other path, whether the path of money-making or gymnastics or philosophy, are not called lovers. The name of the whole is appropriated to those whose affection takes one form only. They alone are said to be love or lovers. So you see where she's going. Anyone who loves is a lover. Anyone who loves anything is in love. And remember all the other guys, the drunk guys, they're like, well, the common people, they don't understand love. They're vulgar. And so, the highest praise for the God. She's like, no, everyone who loves honors Eros and participates in Eros. I dare say, Socrates says, that you are right. Yes, she added, and you hear people say that lovers are seeking their other half, Aristophanes. But I say that they are seeking neither for the half of themselves nor for the whole, unless the half or the whole also be a good. And they will cut off their own hands and feet and cast them away if they are evil. For they love not what is their own, unless there be someone who calls what belongs to him the good, and what belongs to another the evil. For there is nothing which men love but the good. Is there anything? Certainly, I should say, there is nothing, Socrates replies, just completely accedes to her argument. Then she said, the simple truth is that human beings love the good. Yes, Socrates says, to which must be added that they love the possession of the good. Yes, that must be added. And not only the possession, but the everlasting possession of the good. That must be added too, Diotima. Then love, she said, may be described generally as the love is the love of the everlasting possession of the good. That is most true, Diotima. Love, she says, is the birth of beauty. If this then be the nature of love, can you tell me further? She said, what is the manner of the pursuit? How do we find love? How do we seek it? And she says, tell me, Socrates. He said, I don't know. Nay, Diotima, if I had known, I wouldn't have been here asking you. Well, she said, I will teach you. The object which they have in view is birth and beauty, whether of body or soul. Body or soul. And she says to him, Diotima, to the great Socrates, how do you ever expect to become a master in the art of love if you don't know these things? I have told you already, Diotima, that my ignorance is the reason why I'm here. Now remember, he's telling this to a group of drunk men in ancient Greece. These are, Diotima says, the lesser mysteries of love, into which even you, Socrates, may enter. You dumb philosopher. Even you may understand this. To the greater and the more hidden ones, which are the crown of these, into which, if you pursue them in the right spirit, they will lead. And they will lead, she says, to a noble life. Now, Luce Irigaray, who I quoted before in an article in Hypatia, a great feminist journal, has this amazing interpretation of the symposium and Diotima in particular that I want to share with you, and then I'm almost done. This is Irigaray. For if love possessed all that he desired, he would desire no more. He must lack, eros, must lack, in order to desire still. Satisfaction is the death of desire, right? But if love had nothing at all to do with the beautiful and good things, he would not desire them either. Thus, love, eros, is an intermediary in a very specific sense. Does he lose his status as a god? Not necessarily. He is neither mortal nor immortal, eros. He is between one and the other, which qualifies him as demonic. Take a moment. Love is demon. And of course, some of you will know that she's playing on a word here, daimon, right? Which is quite literally an intermediary between gods and mortals. But she's French, so she's got to mess with you a little bit. She continues, love is a demon. His function is to transmit to the gods what comes from men, and to men what comes from the gods. Like everything else that is daimonic, love is complementary to the gods and to men in such a way as to join everything with itself. It's the in-between. You know, all these guys and us, we're like, love is this and love is that. And no, love can't be that. It's the opposite of this. She's like, love is there. It's working in between all this. Diotima is, to Irigaray's interpretation. There must be a being of middling nature in order for men and gods to enter into relations, into conversations, which makes love a kind of divination, priestly knowledge of things connected with sacrifice, initiation, incantation, prediction in general, and magic. Remember, she says, that Eros is a child himself of plenty and poverty. He was born of plenty and poverty, love, Eros. He is barefoot, going out under the stars in search of an encounter with reality, seeking the embrace, the acquaintance, the co-birthing of whatever gentleness of soul, beauty, wisdom might be found there. This incessant quest he inherits from his mother. He is a philosopher through his mother, an adept in invention through his father. But his passion for love, for beauty, for wisdom comes to him from his mother and from the date when he was conceived, desired and wanted, besides, by his mother. There is, Irigere says on behalf of Diotima, divine generation, birthing in every union, in every union. Walt Whitman knew this. He knew a lot of things. This is called a glimpse. A glimpse through an interstice caught of a crowd of workmen and drivers in a bar room around the stove late of a winter night, and I, unremarked, seated in a corner. Of a youth who loves me and whom I love, silently approaching and seating himself near that he may hold me by the hand. A long while, amid the noises of coming and going, of drinking and oath and smutty jest, there we two, content, happy in being together, speaking little, perhaps not a word. Thank you for your attention. Yeah.